Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of The Monster's Den. It's Thursday night. Come on, Jamie, give it the program.
Oh, sorry.
Here we go.
I was looking at Dan and going, man, he looks like Uncle Jesse. My mind just went somewhere else.
I'm trying to get the Roy Calhoun and Motel Hell look, but yeah,
there you go. There you go. So, of course, here tonight we got Mr. Dan Brown is with us. Chris Allo is here. Jamie Laszlo, and we're keeping him up late, as always, all the way from Scotland, Mr. Davy Gallagher. What's up, gentlemen? How are you today? It's William Friedkin Day. I know he passed away over a month ago, August 7th, as a matter of fact. But we're going to do a little homage to Mr. Friedkin, the great director today. And specifically, we're going to be talking about The Exorcist. Perhaps his, maybe next to The French Connection, his classic film that he will always be known for. And it's also a good time to be talking about The Exorcist because we've got a 4K release of The Exorcist coming out in just a couple of weeks, right? I think mid-late October, something like that.
Oh, it's this month.
Yeah. Or is it the end of September? I'm losing track of exactly when it is.
And of course, there's a brand new Exorcist film coming out.
Really?
No, there's not.
David's like, no, there's not. Depending on how you feel about that, right? Yeah, exactly. So I figured before we talk about the 4K release and what we can expect from that, I figured it might be cool to have everybody talk a little bit about the effect of The Exorcist on their lives. Maybe the first time they saw it, how many times have they seen it? Does it still hold up today like it did all those years ago? And, would you consider it a horror classic? So, Dan, why don't you kind of kickstart us off tonight with some thoughts on The Exorcist and what it means to you?
For starters, I mean, being the senior member of the group, I saw it when it first came out in the theaters the first time. And so, like we'll say about it, is that it was certainly the type of thing that was talked around the water cooler about. There was a lot of hype. There was a lot of radio spots. There was a lot of controversy around it as well when it came out. But most people went to that film, including myself, watching it like this. You know what was going to happen. And I went in, saw it. I went actually with a date. Double dated with somebody else and went to a great date movie because at some point in time the girl's going to jump in your arms and hide.
Am I the only one that's thinking, Dan, did you happen to get lucky, or did this movie ruin those chances? Because I could probably see it ruining.
I got lucky before I went in there just in case it failed miserably and she was
good thinking.
Thinking out of the box. So no, it was pretty wild because you saw it and I haven't watched it that much over the years because it is such a well done film. It's the type of thing you revisit because it's so well written and so forth. So I really kind of sat and watched it fully when it came out with the director's cut, when they put the extra footage in, and then I just saw it last week. But last week I watched the original version, which I prefer, and it holds up. I mean, it holds up. I mean, nothing really happens in the first 40 minutes. Just this slow burn, nothing. And then all of a sudden, like you hear the noises in the attic and this and that and so on and so on. And when she finally pees on the carpet, that's when it just hits the pedal to the metal. And it just takes off from there. And then you meet the priests and although their segment, I remember it seeming like taking forever and ever in a positive sense, it's like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. But it builds, and a spot that I saw in 1974, saw it early 74, came out December 73, that made me jump back then, and it made me jump again, is when she goes up into the attic and she has the candle and it flares up. And that still made me jump out of my chair. Even though I knew that was going to happen, but it's so well crafted, so well done. I think the extended version, the thing with the spider sequence and stuff, it breaks the momentum in the film as opposed to the original. However, I was told when I was discussing with Pete, we ran into it last week, I said the scene where we agreed with the scene where the priests are talking, it's like a minute long, puts much more depth into the characters. And it really shows that Merrin is afraid. Because after that, he goes and takes his nitroglycerin pill. So he's giving an excuse like it's just dread. And holds up to this day. Loved it. I loved it as much as I saw it the first time around. I sat and watched it this time by myself, so Nobody had to jump in my arms. And because my wife will say, "Why are you watching this anyhow?" So okay, you go take care of what you got to take care of. But yeah, thumbs up.
So some people don't see it as a horror film. Do you consider it a horror film?
Uh, it's a benchmark horror film. The Exorcist did for horror films. You think about it, before that, there was never any real films about possession. The closest we got to it was some silent films like Haxan and so forth. And then you see Rosemary's Baby's Dead. I think it was kind of like a foggy sequence where there's something going on, but you never. So this was a bench. This set the bench for everything. And after that, then it was The Exorcism. Was the other one? They got fully into it. So it is a horror film, but it's a trend-setting horror film.
Yeah.
It's a mature horror film. It really is no cheap scares in this film. It builds up. The acting is superb. You can't beat it. It's a well done film. That's all it is.
Yeah. To me, it's a great drama film with horrific elements, which
totally... It did for horror what 2001 did for science fiction films.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a good point. Chris, your experience with The Exorcist over the years.
My experience is quite different from Dan. My parents saw it on the original release. My mom was not a horror movie fan, and she was literally freaked the fuck out for years. I guess I was 2, so I don't remember this, but I heard the story for years, how upon coming home from the theater that night with my dad, my mom had a bottle of holy water and started throwing it around the house because she was so freaked out by it.
I can see that.
I grew up, a horror movie fan thanks to my uncle, but this was the movie that, they showed it on TV. I want to say in it was late. It was like late 70s or early 80s. And my mom, my parents had already taken me into the theater to see stuff like Alien and Friday the 13th. I was 9, 10 years old, but they, my dad didn't care. My mom forbade me to watch The Exorcist at home. And then I rented it on VHS when I was about 12. And I'll be honest, I was kind of disappointed because I had read so much about it in Fangoria and Famous Monsters. And to my mom, this literally was the Antichrist. And I was like, that's it? Like, it takes forever to get going. The second half I thought was great. But, I kept revisiting it over the years. And yeah, this is one of those movies. We did a whole episode on this, Pete, where, you had your opinion completely changed. Yeah, over the years, my opinion has completely changed on this film. Yeah, I think it's a masterpiece. I mean, I have tons of Exorcist memorabilia. I really should have grabbed it. It's in my attic. I actually have a life-size Reagan that I got a couple years ago from Spirit Halloween. She's got the puke on her and her head spins and she says something goofy. But yeah, I've met Linda Blair like 4 times. Although every time I only had her sign one Exorcist thing. I really love her movies like her real trash, like Savage Streets and Chained Heat. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a horror classic. Yeah, you and I saw it. Was that last year or the year before?
The year before. 2 years ago.
Okay, yeah, 2 years ago. Every year, Pete and I go to the 24-hour horror movie film festival put on by Exhumed Films. And we never know what they're going to show. And that was the opening film. And, I think it was a great way to open the show.
12 o'clock noon on a Saturday, the first film of the day. Yeah, that was something special, right? Yeah. Yeah, and I had never seen it in theaters ever. So that was, for me, that was amazing.
Yes, that was my first time. Years ago, there was a local theater running it. And unfortunately, I had a problem at the house, a flood in the basement, so I couldn't go. So yeah, and I always wanted to run The Exorcist at Hudson Horror, but just never got to it. But yeah, so it was great to see it on the big screen, and yeah, it's coming back to the big screen in October. Yeah, October 1st and 4th. It's one of those Regal or Fathom events things nationwide, and it's going to play all over in advance of the new Exorcist movie. which comes out, I believe, October 6th.
So right after it, yeah.
Right before it, yeah.
Right before, yeah.
Is the new one a reboot? They're rebooting it, or are they?
It's one of those soft reboot sequel things.
Yeah, it's a soft reboot, so they're pretending all the other Exorcist movies have not happened other than Exorcist 1, which is the same exact strategy that they did for Halloween, and it's the same guy, and those Halloween movies sucked. And I have no reason to believe that this new Exorcist movie will be any good. And of course, this new Exorcist movie is first of a new trilogy. But I guess
the trailer looks awful.
Yeah, trailer looked pretty bad. It didn't sell me at all. But you'll have to see it October 6th and let us know.
Unless you got some heavy hitter actors, man. Max von Sydow, Ellen Burstyn.
Well, they brought back Ellen Burstyn.
What's that?
She's in it. Ellen Burstyn's in it.
Yeah.
New one.
Yeah. I believe
128, but she's there.
The story I read.
She's 90. She's literally 90.
She's 90 years old. I read that they filmed whatever they wanted from her for the new trilogy all at once. Because listen, 90 years old, man, you can go at any time.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that. And she's
I bet you anything. Linda Blair's going to show up either at the end of part 1 or in part 2. I'm sure they're going to Force Awakens this shit and
cha-ching, cha-ching. Yes.
So Chris, Dan and I touched on it. Your opinion on the director's cut as opposed to the original?
There's a few. The one thing I really like is the spider sequence. I thought that was really cool. The tongue was really CGI looking. I'm sure they could fix that today. So I like that. As a kid, that was like the legendary scene that you never saw, and it's in one of those documentaries. I think it was a BBC documentary on one of the early, nice special edition DVDs. But I was just telling my buddy Glenn, man, I did not like in the special edition how they did those CGI Captain Howdy faces all over. Yeah. It looks so fake. Maybe with today's technology, somebody could fix it, but it just looks so fake. It totally took me out of the film. So some things I liked, some things I didn't like.
Yeah.
Too much face. Too much of the face.
Yeah, I agree. Jamie, how about this effect on you? This movie's effect on you over the years?
Well, I recently watched a documentary on the making of it, and everyone involved was saying this is not a horror movie. I hate it when they call it a horror movie, when people call it a horror. And the first thing I thought of was when Steven Wilson says, I don't do Prague. Yeah. Shut up. You do Prague. This is a horror movie. If this is not a horror movie, I don't know what your definition of a horror movie is. This is a fucking horror movie. I get in an argument with my buddy's wife all the time when we go out to the bars. She'll tell me Poltergeist is not a horror movie. And then he'll go, oh my God. And it's 10 minutes of her yelling and me and her yelling, but it is a horror movie. It's a haunted house movie. Jesus. But I saw it the first time I saw it. I was 14, I think, 1984-ish. I heard a lot about it. And I remember saying, I'm going to put on my big boy pants and I'm going to do this right. So I rented it. I waited till my parents were asleep. It's 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock at night, they're upstairs sleeping. I turned off all the lights in the house. I wanted the full effect. I didn't know what I was going into, but I wanted the full effect. I went downstairs and I watched it on the TV with my dog Perkins. And we sat named after Deputy Perkins from BJ and the Bear, deep cut. And we sat there on the couch and we watched this fucking movie and it freaked me out. I mean, the images of his mother on the bed and her walking in silence up and down the subway, those are the things that got me. And every time they're walking towards that room, I'm like, oh no, not again. But you know what? I did not turn on any lights. I was not going to cheat. I wanted this to be the full effect. It's like telling someone to slow down the roller coaster. You're scared to shitless, but you don't want it to slow down. So yeah, it really affected me. It instantly became one of my favorite movies. I mean, I always say it's in my top 5, but I do have about 17 movies in my top 5. So it's right there with all of them. I read the books about 30 years ago. I got some early pressings right there. This is the one I read.
It's a great book.
The
Really.
book flies by, man.
Yeah.
When the devil starts talking, you don't put the book down until at least that part's over. It just flies by. And there's a lot of quotes in the book that you see in the movie as well. And I lived in Virginia 95 to 98. And I never went to the stairs. I was only about 40 minutes away from the stairs in Georgetown. And then I moved away. And then about 2002-ish, I went back to visit my friends there. And I said, you know what? I don't know when I'm going to be back here. I'm going to go drive to the fucking stairs. So I drove there, and I don't even know how I found it. I don't know how we found anything without MapQuest or Google Maps back then. I have no idea how I got around, but I found it, and it was cool. I mean, it's right. It's a gas station, though. It's got the big awning, and people are getting gas. It's not very iconic looking. There's not people there selling, Linda Blair action figures and stuff. It's just a gas station. So I wanted to take a picture, but that was before smartphones and everything like that. So I just, let it all sunk in, and then I left. And I am getting the 4K. I did order it from Amazon UK because it looked like it was all the bells and whistles, the leather casing and the pictures and whatever. So I have that coming, which will replace the Blu-ray that Pete just showed up. And this replaced my old DVD. Remember the paper DVD? That replaced, I thought it was really cool when I had the VHS, because this even replaced something. Remember when you would tape something off of HBO, and then I have my original tapes from HBO VHS tape, and I put this in today. All right. I dragged out my VCR, an old school TV, and I put it in. I said, maybe it's off of HBO, and you'll see the HBO opening, the 3D turning HBO thing, and this is going to be cool. And for some reason, the idiot I am, I put it in one day and just taped a day's worth of VH1. It's like behind the music on here, Fleetwood Mac and live Fleetwood Mac and 100 greatest artists of all time. I'm like, what did I do? Why did I do that? So yeah, but it is
that'll be out in tomorrow's trash now.
No, it's the original tape though that it's just not on there anymore. So yeah, great fucking movie. And so you know what I will say, not a fan of the French Connection. I got this on the cheap. Remember watching it in the 90s, and me and my roommate were like, that's supposed to be a classic. So I watched it again, even though this is almost unwatchable. It's like watching a movie through a sandbox. Awful. So I did watch it, and I'm like, it's 90 minutes of Gene Hackman either tailing people or chasing them. That's it. Chris Laszlo talks about Rosemary's Baby. If you take away the doctor's appointments, take away that you just him running after people, and it's a 3-minute movie. If you want a better version of French Connection, To Live and Die in LA is a better type movie, kind of the same thing that he also directed. So I think that's a lot better.
I really like French Connection, but
I don't get it. Someone needs to explain to me why it's so great.
Pete? Something about the picking your toes in Poughkeepsie?
Pick your feet in Poughkeepsie. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Popeye Doyle, classic character.
I think I like 2 better, even though they have the whole detox thing going on a little
2
bit.
is fun. 2 gets a lot of shit, but I enjoy the second film quite a bit.
It was like the Grindhouse version.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned Georgetown before, where the original staircase is. I actually, right before the pandemic, I was in Washington, D.C. on a business trip, and one of my coworkers and I, we were out having a bunch of drinks and dinner right in Georgetown. And I didn't even make the connection that we were in that place, and I probably could have gone there until I got back to the hotel. I'm like, shit, we were probably pretty close to where the Exorcist was, the outside.
Yeah, it's right by the big bridge there that everyone kind of takes there. So all you had to do is make a left, and it's right there instead of a right.
Yep. Yeah, I was not far from there. There's like a whole row of restaurants, and that's where I was. And I was like, damn,
you see it in the opening of the movie. You see the bridge, and the right goes to everything, and the right there's the steps to the left.
Yeah, exactly. Jamie, what do you think of Linda Blair's performance in The Exorcist, seeing as how young she was? And
She didn't know what she was doing half the time. She was just doing what she was told. And again, in that documentary, they were saying how, you know, it was amazing how she was able to turn it on and turn it off. Just do what she's told and do it well, because they had to get that room cold, you know, below freezing. And once the actors got in there, the temperature went up. So they only had so much time to talk with breath coming out. And then they all had to leave, cool it down, come back in. And they said she was able to turn it back on like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's great. You feel for her. You feel, and, you know, Ellen Burstyn got robbed from an Oscar, for crying out loud, when she tells the priest, as someone who's an atheist, that she believes her little girl is possessed, and she's crying into the hanky and everything, and probably needs an exorcism. That alone right there, that part is worth an Oscar. Who won? Glenda Jackson for A Touch of Class. Does anyone know that fucking movie? No. Fuck no. Nobody remembers that. Everybody remembers this. She got A Touch of Class. You know, 65% on Rotten Tomatoes of audience score. So 40, you know, come on.
Can you buy anything from A Touch of Class at your local horror movie convention?
No, and I got this at Walmart for $9. They had no Touch of Class t-shirts next to it.
Pencil protectors.
That's too funny. All right, Davey, what does The Exorcist mean to you?
Geez, Louise. So I mean, it's got a bit of a potted history in the UK, because it wasn't technically one of the video nasties, but it was banned from home video for quite a long time. So it didn't come out on VHS. It originally did come out before there were certifications in the early 80s, swiftly withdrawn, and then didn't come out again until 2001. So it was a long, long time.
Yeah.
And then it didn't come out, it never made its television debut until 2001 either. So it was really built up as this long-lost classic. And you could get bootlegs and whatnot, and of course, and so people had seen it. It wasn't one of those ones that was impossible to find. Every horror convention you went to would have a copy of The Exorcist as a bootleg. So the first version I saw was the DVD had the worst title ever. Was it the version you haven't seen? Is that what it was called or something?
That's the title that they used for the theatrical re-release in the States,
Yes,
which is a terrible, terrible title.
Yeah. And then they changed that and called it the extended director's cut, which is wrong as well, because the director's cut is the theatrical cut. The one that we now consider the extended cut is William Peter Blatty's extended version with his additions back in, the Kinderman stuff with Lee J. Cobb, more dialogue, setting up everything. So it's really a writer's cut. It's not a director's cut at all. The film itself is a horror 101 masterpiece, and it could only really exist in that period of the 70s, where you do have that cynicism that's crept into American filmmaking. You couldn't have it in the 60s. You need this almost Watergate era-like cynicism for a priest like Jason Miller's character, Father Karras, to be so desperate, so down, so outside his own faith. You kind of need the times to be dark and cynical to allow him to exist.
He's so flawed, right, Jamie? I mean, he's so flawed as a character.
That's Davey.
Yeah.
He's a good person, but he doesn't know whether or not that means you need to have faith. And then you get Father Merrin. I love the name Lancaster Merrin. That's just a wonderful name, Father Lancaster Merrin. Sounds like a tape of Spitfire or something, doesn't it? Lancaster Merrin. But he is almost the extended cameo almost. I mean, he's in it at the start and then he's in it for the last act, but you kind of forget all about Father Merrin. To me, as much as we can talk about Linda Blair and we can talk about Ellen Burstyn, it's Jason Miller's performance that really grounds the whole thing for me. He gives it that vulnerability that you really need him to come to terms with everything that's going on in the film, everything that's happening to Reagan and everything that's happening in his own personal life. You need him to rectify that before the film can have a real resolution. He's got the character arc of the film, really. Chris McNeil's character arc is just accepting that this is happening. Reagan's is obviously a passive one because she can't control it, but his is the character arc. He has to ultimately come round to the nature of self-sacrifice, because that's a godly thing to do, which he wouldn't have done at the start of the film. I don't think he may have done it for a little girl anyway, but it kind of tests him in terms of where's your faith. Is it in God, or is it been wiped away by the just this dredge of humanity that when he's wandering the streets and everything's filthy, and when the homeless guy asks any change for an old altar boy father, he's got this look as if, like, what's the world, what is this place? It's just horrible and desolate, and that's one of the most chilling parts of the movie for me, when he is in the room and the demon Pazuzu, if you like. I hate that so much. Pazuzu, it's so much better when it's just a demon or the devil. But Pazuzu uses that voice again to replicate it with any change for an old altar boy father, and that kind of shows you that you're always being watched. There's always evil lurking. It's always around. But even that first half of the movie, you could think it was boring if you just wanted a straight horror film. I think that's horrific too. When Reagan's going into the hospital and getting all those tests done, I think that's absolutely horrific. That is like David Cronenberg body horror stuff. The test that they're putting her through, doing the incisions on her, and then putting her in that machine and just shaking her like a fucking milkshake or something. It's horrendous what that girl goes through.
They really make the machines loud too.
Yeah, and that's
loud.
The sound design in the whole film is amazing, because you get the guy who did can't remember his name, but he did El Topo, and he's adding animal noises to Pazuzu's voice, where it's not just Mercedes McCambridge doing a creepy voice. She's been augmented by animal noises, and the swirling head, when it goes 360, that's the noise of a wallet, an old leather wallet just creaking open, and they just load it right down to make that. And that's genius kind of stuff. I think he got an Oscar for sound design, or it was nominated at least, but I know it got best adapted screenplay. So Glenda Jackson didn't win everything that year, but it's a stunning film. It still chills. I mean, that's the one thing about it. I think it's the difference between a jump scare fest, because there is only one jump scare in the film. It's the bit Dan was talking about, the bit in the attic, and that's nothing to do with demons. That's what's great about it. The rest of it's just a real chiller, an old school chiller, that if it wasn't so explicit in terms of what Reagan has to do with the crucifix and all the dialogue, it's not an explicit film at all in that regard. It's a bit like Texas Chainsaw. You feel like you've seen a lot more. It feels like it's been a much more violent and visceral film than what you actually have in front of you. And it's actually quite a patient, low-key film. And it kind of needs to be, because it's not the sort of film where you're going to have the heroes riding in and saving the day. They don't know if it's going to work, and it's really taken out of them. They literally both have to give their dying breath to rescue the day. It's if you've seen I've got where is it? Yeah, The Ninth Configuration, William Blatty's other film that he wrote and then directed, as well as Exorcist 3. That's also about the nature of sacrifice, and about accepting your faith in the darkest of situations. So it's a theme that he would go back to over and over again, because he did train as a Jesuit priest, which again is why I think Jason Miller's character is so integral, because he's the William Blatty stand-in. He's the one that we're kind of following through this journey, and we're meeting Chris and we're meeting Reagan, and it's horrible what they're going through, and they're wonderful performances, but it's Jason Miller's performance that really grounds it and gives it that very 1973 grounded new Hollywood effect. And so does William Friedkin, obviously. I mean, for him to even direct this kind of genre thing after The French Connection had won all sorts of Oscars, it'd be unthinkable for, I don't know, Coppola to do that after The Godfather. If he didn't do The Conversation, can you imagine Coppola doing a horror film? You know, I mean, he did with Dracula, but that was 20 years later. He didn't go straight into genre film. So yeah, it was a very strange move for Friedkin, but it's a wonderful move for him because he brings that documentary feel, and it's just got a wonderful chilling nature throughout where it's very detached. You kind of see events. He doesn't go for big flary directorial flourishes. It's all very, very matter of fact. It's all very cold, very steely. Especially when you go into that room, as Jamie said, every time you go into that room, it's like entering the seventh layer of hell. But it's just so wonderful, and anytime you see it with an audience, you can always tell who the people who probably didn't think it was going to be terribly scary because they just shut up after a few minutes, and then the terror just takes over. That's when a really great film hits you. It's when you're stunned into silence more than anything else. You're not screaming, but you're just chilled out. It feels freaky. I think it's one of the few films where I can say it actually feels evil. It doesn't feel horror, it doesn't feel genre, it feels evil. It feels like it's actually depicting something like this going on, and it's an absolute stone cold masterpiece. And as Jamie said, it's a 100% horror film. It absolutely is. I think sometimes people try and take things outside of genre films because they want to, oh no, well, we can't admit to liking genre films, so we better pretend we actually like drama, and this is actually a great drama. No, this is a great horror film that has drama in it as well. It's both of those things. It's partially a cop film as well. Kinderman's very underwritten in the theatrical cut, but his story would be fleshed out in Exorcist 3 with William Blatty, and I think that's a wonderful sequel. The less said about Exorcist 2, the better, or the ones from 2004, the two ones with, was it Rennie Harlin and Paul Schrader?
Never saw them.
Those new ones,
It's hard to tell which one's worse.
Yeah,
kind of like the two different versions of Exorcist 2.
Yeah, I mean,
which one's worse?
I'm number 3 because there's two versions of number 3 as well, and I actually don't like Blatty's version of the end of that. Just you shoot the demon with a gun. Okay, that's no. Yeah, it's lightning in a bottle. This original film is a total stone cold masterpiece from everybody just at the top of their game. Performances, direction, writing, sound design, editing, just everything that could go right did go right to give us one of the bleakest, scariest, but at the same time, kind of, oh, it's certainly not upbeat, but it gives you a positive message somewhat towards the end where faith is rewarded for Reagan and for her mother, not so much for the priests. So that's their sacrifice as men of the cloth. But yeah, it's a wonderful film. And there's a reason why there's a million different features and documentaries and books have been written about it. Very briefly though, as Jamie mentioned, that 4K that's coming out, do not get the American version if you want the extras because they ain't on the American one. They're digital only. The UK one is coming out in a few editions. The normal edition has got the extras. The £70 edition has got the leather bound thing with the BFI book, but that's available separately if you don't want the book. And then there's a kind of middle ground one with all the tat. But Warners are just screwing America over again by not including any extras. Although even the new stacked edition does not have all the stuff from the 3-disc Blu-ray.
I was just going to ask you that. So they haven't ported everything over, not all of it?
Not from the 3-disc Blu-ray. From the 1 and 2-disc, yes, but not the 3-disc. So, as always. But yeah, The Exorcist is it's The Exorcist, isn't it? It's not really much more we can say about it other than it's just a stone cold masterpiece, and it's seminal. It's horror 101.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's my favorite film of all time, and one of the things you mentioned that I think needs to be reiterated is the realism factor. I mean, you watch this movie and you mentioned Chainsaw Massacre 2. There's something about both of these films that's so gritty and almost so real. It's very real. Like you watch these films and you feel like you're part of what's going on. And that's the scary thing, is because they just seem real and they put you in a place that really can terrify you very, very quickly. I remember the first time I saw The Exorcist was probably, kind of like Chris. I think it was on like HBO in the early 80s. So we had just had HBO for a couple of years. And I saw it for the first time and I thought it was pretty frightening, but didn't really dwell on that much. And then I may have watched it one or two more times during the 80s, but then I caught it. I was down with some friends at the Jersey Shore in the very early 90s for like a little week summer trip. And we went to a friend's house one night and we were drinking and it was late and everybody was hanging out with the lights off and candles on. And someone was like, "Oh, you guys want to watch The Exorcist?" And I was like, "Ah, yeah, cool, whatever." But I hadn't seen it in a number of years. And I don't know whether it was the setting, being away from home in a place I didn't know, with some people, that some I knew some but didn't know the others, and it was dark and we had been drinking, but the movie scared the shit out of me. And I remember for like months after that, anywhere I was, if I was alone in the house and it was dark, kept like looking over my shoulder all the time and thinking of all those scenes, like you mentioned, Jamie, walking in, watching them all walk into that room and that feeling of dread. Because again, this movie is so real that you feel like you're going in there with them. And I always kind of, for a couple of years, man, I was like, this movie really scared the shit out of me and really like kind of more disturbing than anything else. And but I kind of came to grips with that and just realized that, hey, that's a mark of a great film, that can make you feel that way. And now, and this is going back at least a decade, I religiously watch this film at least once a year, every single year. And it's kind of like, everybody has their like favorite movie they watch around Halloween time. You have at least one, maybe more, but there's one that you always have to watch every year. That's The Exorcist for me. I mean, it's pretty dynamite.
Yeah. You know what? I was thinking and remembered when I watched it for the first time, my Italian grandmother recently died. I'm talking like the same year, so months before. So the images of that Italian old woman, I mean, I thought my grandmother was coming down the stairs that night to visit me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I still, even now when I watch it, the scene where the priest is replaying the tape of all the weird noises and I mean, that's creepy.
Yeah, and the phone, that's the jump scare for me when he's listening and the phone rings.
Yeah,
that phone hits me.
Yeah,
really well done. Heavy. The entire film is heavy. There's really just open the beginning credits. I mean, even with Father Merrin in the beginning, it's just there's this heaviness.
Yeah,
and it's just heavier and heavier. And as Jamie said, there's this air of dread. And what's behind the door? The dread has built up so much that that's when you're going to cover your eyes when they open the door. What are we going to walk into here?
Yeah, that's why like the whole spider sequence of her coming down the stairs, I think is very cool. But it kind of like almost like it doesn't belong, right? It's cool for what it is, but like you're thinking, all right, so she's out of her, she's all tied up, and all of a sudden now she's going up and down the stairs, then she's back. It's just, I think it's really cool. It's a great scene. I just don't know how well it fits, right? Because it's kind of like, it's just like, oh, look at that, right? Yeah. But it's definitely cool. I
think it's more effective. I think it's more effective if she doesn't leave that room personally. And that becomes a devil's lair kind of thing.
I almost think it would be cooler if it happened in the room as opposed to going in the stairs. Like if she did something like that in the room, I think would have been a little more effective. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
3, okay, which I personally like. There's a scene where George C. Scott, who's now playing Kinderman, is in the hospital, and he's talking to somebody in a hallway, and I believe there's like a day room behind it, and you're seeing, and he's talking to, and this old woman, like the spider, is crawling across the ceiling, and you see it, he doesn't, and you're going like, whoa, what the fuck was that? That type of effect. It's but that was even creepier in The Exorcist 3, in my opinion. But
yeah,
overall, Exorcist, you can't beat it. You can't. And
you know what? It's a quotable movie. I quote the movie in my daily life all the time. Every time my wife is a pain in the ass, why you do this to me, Damie? Why you do this to me, Damie? Every time I quoted it today, right here, trying to find. I got a billion wires behind my TV, and I found the starting point of the wire, and then it's just somehow disappeared back there. I said, "Oh, so you're nowhere. You're nowhere, huh? You're just gonna go." And then I started going, "I am no one. I am no one." It just turned into that. The demon says that over and over on the tape, I think.
Yeah.
So it's always in my brain, and quotes are always there that I'm grabbing in my daily life.
I mentioned before how 2 years ago, this film opened up the 24-hour horathon in PA. And, it was a thrill for me because it's my favorite film of all time. I'd never seen the theaters, but I remember and what you have to remember is at this festival, you don't know any of the films that are going to be shown. So here we are, the festival is just kicking off. It's just afternoon. We're all sitting down. The lights go out. The last trailer plays because they play trailers between each film. And then all of a sudden the credits go up and the music starts. And we were all like, holy shit, it's The Exorcist. And everybody clapped and was so excited. And man, Chris, do you remember you could hardly hear a pin drop in that theater in the entire film? And then it got like a standing ovation at the end.
And wow. I remember when it ended, because it had been a little bit since I seen it, probably since the last Blu-ray release. I did turn to Pete and I was like, Jesus Christ, they could never make this movie today.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's the one reason I am curious to see this new Exorcist, to see how much they're really going to push the envelope, because I was like, holy Jesus. Yeah. Like, this really is such a movie that made 50 years ago, but wow, just something that, I just can't see anybody touching the subject matter even remotely.
Yeah. And I think the way they did it is so respected by the fans still to this day. Just its impact is just it's just off the charts.
And you guys didn't go in 2000 to see it?
Yeah, I did not see the re-release. Oh, yeah. I do remember cracking a joke with Linda Blair, though, which she did not get. I might have mentioned this once. I was at a Chiller Theater show, like right after the Star Wars special editions came out in 1997. And she was like, oh, yeah. She was signing something. I think I was having her sign something for Savage Streets. And she's like, oh, yeah, The Exorcist is going to get re-released. She's like, The Exorcist special edition is going to have all these extra scenes. So I turned to her and go, oh, are they finally going to have that scene where you meet Jabba the Hutt? And she looked at me. She's like, what? She had no idea.
Obviously not a Star Wars fan, right?
Like, she turned to her handler, and the handler had to explain. And I'm like, all right, just give my Savage Streets poster. I got to go. Forget it.
Yeah.
Forget
it. Yeah.
That's too funny.
Yeah, they broke up the rhythm with that 2000 version. It's like a song that very well, and the rhythm of it. And when they started doing faces where there shouldn't be faces, and I'm like, you're breaking up the rhythm, man.
No, it's not just the face. I mean, Pazuzu does pop up 4 or 5 times, and I don't like that. But they also do the one good thing I think they've done in that is the part towards the end where Damien's face goes from demon to human and back again. Yeah. They've digitally done that. And that looks great. So there's no hard cut anymore, because it always looked kind of cheap having to do the hard cut. And that looks fantastic. But then there's a really bad bit where Linda Blair turns into kind of Pazuzu face lying in the bed, and that looks terrible. So it's CGI in 2000. And they obviously didn't have a full budget to do it, because it's just a DVD they were doing it for, so it wouldn't have been a massive budget.
But you guys remember that was big thing back then. After Star Wars did it, it was like, oh, let's do the Exorcist special edition, re-release Alien, Night of the Living Dead, E.T. It was just like, let's redo whatever we can and make money off it again.
I still think it's entirely worth it for the scene on the stairs, though. Because I love that exchange so much with why her, why this girl, and the point Damien is to make us despair, to think that the possibility of God loving us doesn't exist anymore. That's wonderful. It kind of tells you their worldview that Damien doesn't understand, and Karis thinks he's got an answer, but it's a really dark answer. I love that. I love the original too, because it is just them sitting on the stairs with no dialogue. That's powerful in its own ways. If they've kind of got no ideas left, they're just doing their best. But yeah, I think that's the genius of The Exorcist. There's 2 guys sitting in a chair, sitting on a flight of stairs, one kind of high and one kind of low, and it's wonderfully shot, but it's nothing fancy about it apart from that. It's just 2 guys sitting there, and it's a powerful creepy scene and gets underneath your skin. It's a real chiller.
Yeah.
I think that's the genius of the whole film. It just creeps under your skin, the whole thing.
And they both look exhausted as well. It's
Oh
just
yeah, for sure.
see how much it's taking out of them. Yeah, the thing with the face pops up when Linda, what's her name? Evelyn Burstyn is walking by, and you see the demon face pop up like a flash thing. It looks like Zombie in Pee Wee's house. Yeah.
I mean, I never liked the look of Pazuzu, and I never liked the calling it Pazuzu. I mean, that is in the original novel; it is called Pazuzu, but I don't know why. It's like what was the one about 10 years ago? It's not The Conjuring, it's one of those other ones, Sinister or something, where there's another ridiculous Bagul. It's like, no, if you give something a name like that, you can't possibly take it seriously. It doesn't become a threat when it's called Pazuzu. Just sounds ridiculous. But that original, just Blatty recognized that and let Friedkin just call it the devil, even though it's a demon masquerading as the devil. It's horrific. I really think that to echo Dan's point there though about Jason Miller and Max von Sydow, their performances getting gradually more fucked as the movie goes on, especially Jason Miller. His hangdog expression is so good for this film because he's already kind of doesn't know what to do with his life and whatnot. And it just gradually is just more and more down and depressed. And then towards the exorcism itself, his facial acting is just unreal.
Really good, yeah. Yeah.
It wouldn't have worked if they had a star actor. It had to be somebody like Jason Miller who came from the theatre. Wasn't a big name. Because the original choices were big stars. They wanted Dustin Hoffman for that, and they wanted Marlon Brando to be Father Merrin, and they wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct it, and it just would not have worked to do this with big stars. They wanted
wasn't Stacy Keach attached to it at some point? I thought
Stacy Keach was cast, and then they let him go because William Peter Blatty really just loved Jason Miller. And that's why Stacy Keach did get the lead in The Ninth Configuration. It was a kind of makeup later on, which is a great movie. But then they wanted Anne Bancroft for the mother, for Chris, and she fell pregnant, and that opened the door to Ellen Burstyn, who the studio didn't want. But yeah, they just wanted a star name. It's a bit like The Godfather. They wanted a star name for every single part, and then gradually, by good luck, they all fell through, and the director got his way in casting relative nobodies who then would go on to be major star. I mean, I think, did Ellen Burstyn not win the Oscar about this time for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore?
I'm pretty sure, right? It was right before.
Yeah, it must have been about then.
Yeah.
Which is a great performance too. Not much merchandise for that, unfortunately, either.
But there really wasn't much merchandise for The Exorcist until recently. William Peter Blatty was against it.
Yeah,
I believe once he passed away, his heirs, I'm assuming, are the ones that gave it the okay, because it wasn't until Jamie's got the shirt, I got the life-size Reagan, but there's tons of if you go to Spirit Halloween, there's tons of Exorcist stuff now, but it's not like Jaws or Star Wars or Planet of the Apes where there was a rush of merchandise. There was nothing until a few years back.
The best merchandise is obviously just the novel. That's never stopped. It's never been out of print, and it's a great read. A bit like Jaws, Peter Benchley's Jaws. It's such a great novel in its own right, even taking the film out. And there's stuff in that you could never have done in the film because it would just never have been allowed to happen. I mean, in the film, you get a slight idea that the room kind of smells weird and it's disgusting. But in the novel, Reagan has constant non-stop diarrhea, and that's why the room stinks. I mean, imagine that being depicted on screen. No. But yeah, it's non-stop in the book, just absolutely gushing, like freaking.
Yeah, I think that's worth another read, because I haven't read that book since like high school, and I think I need to revisit that book again. I remember loving it at the time. It's a good read. Anybody else have any other favorite films from the director other than The Exorcist?
Yeah, Sorcerer.
Sorcerer is good.
Sorcerer is such a great film. It's one of those. There you go. It's one of those great Men in a Mission movies. It's obviously a remake of Wages of Fear, but unlike most remakes, it does do something fresh with it. It takes forever to set up all the different characters, but that's wonderful. It's a real character piece for the first half. You get to meet everybody one by one. So it really establishes everybody. It doesn't just throw you into trucks with nitro and glycerin going over cliffs. No, that's what a modern remake would do, but the original just takes its time of Sorcerer. Great Tangerine Dream soundtrack as well. It's one of the, which Friedkin said he wishes he'd heard Tangerine Dream before because he wouldn't use Tubular Bells. He would have used, which, wow, Mike Oldfield's probably quite grateful for that. That kind of made it. Imagine no Tubular Bells. That would have. And Virgin Records. So that's what made Virgin Records. So yeah.
Wasn't supposed to be Laszlo Schifrin?
Yes, he recorded 6 minutes for the movie, Laszlo Schifrin.
As a matter of fact, when they came out with The Exorcist, they had a big, at one point in the early 90s, they were putting out like these big, large box sets. And it gave you the film and VHS and a clamshell. It gave you some lobby cards. It gave you a little booklet. And then they included, the only way you can get it, they included the Exorcist soundtrack with the complete Laszlo Schifrin as a secondary bonus track. And that was the only way to get that. And then, Tubular Bells they brought in, I guess, strictly for them. I don't know what their reasoning before that was, but it works.
And Tubular Bells is only in the film once, and it's not in a horror scene at all. It's just Chris walking. And it's not a horror, but because it's on all the trailers, people think it must be. It's the people remember that's the music that plays when Father Thingy turns up. Father Max von Sydow. I'm skipping his name. It's too late for me. Father Max von Sydow turns up. People remember that's the music that plays, and it's not. You only hear Tubular Bells for one scene in the middle of the day when Chris is just walking.
Yeah.
And that whole segment, the whole Mike Oldfield segment is such a small part of that whole album. It really is.
Yeah, and it's not a scary album. It's not a spooky album.
Not at all. Not at all.
I got this vinyl, and you want to Waxworks Records, and the gatefold is really cool.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
I'm pretty scared that's what the new one's going to be. It's just going to be that kind of stuff. What can the demon do? Make people levitate.
But you get two girls, so it's going to be double good.
Yeah.
Twice as good.
It worked for Nostradamus from Judas Priest.
Yeah, there you go. Double album. Dan, do you have any other Friedkin films that you
Sorcerer, as Jamie had said, Friedkin to me is one of these. He's like he was almost 90, and even though he was not in the golden age of Hollywood, he was a journeyman director. He did every number of genres, whatever was thrown at him. One of his earlier films is Good Times with Sonny and Cher, like a lighthearted comedy. Then he did Boys in the Band, which is still an outstanding character play movie. Then, of course, The Exorcist goes through this, even up through Killer Joe, which, have anyone seen Killer Joe? It's dirty noir. Let me tell you, the most batshit last 10 minutes of a film I've ever seen. And all I will say to the audience out here tonight is I can never look at a chicken drumstick without thinking of Gina Gershon. And that's what I'll say. You could figure it out from there.
Matthew McConaughey is great in that as well.
And he has a film coming out, in October. It's a remake of the Caine Mutiny.
Yep.
Take place from Afghanistan War, along with Kiefer Sutherland and Lance Reddick in one of his last roles from John Wick.
Talk about cursed films, eh?
Okay. Yeah. And but no, Friedkin was an actor's director. I mean, from the fact he injuring Ellen Burstyn and throwing her against the wall 40 times. So I think he smacked Gene Hackman once in the film to get an emotion.
Well, plus too, didn't he fire off a pistol with blanks?
Yeah, that was his favorite trick, firing off a gun.
I mean, he was out of the old school mold like William Wellman or Howard Hawks. I mean, these no nonsense, no bullshit directors, and he really is, master of his craft. And his portfolio is impressive. It's wide and extremely versatile. I mean, he's like the Bob Clark of adult cinema. So.
I thought Bob Clark was the Bob Clark of adult cinema. All right.
Yeah.
I like Bug with Ashley Judd. His
Yeah,
return to
that's-
horror there.
Yeah, I never saw that one.
That's pretty good, actually. Yeah.
It's
Not bad. He did
Yeah.
do a lot of forgettable things like Jade. Remember
Ooh.
Jade with the
Oh,
dude from
yeah.
NYPD Blue, I think was in it. What was his
Yeah.
name?
David Caruso.
David Caruso.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
was
Deal
that
the
one like
Century.
NC-17?
What's that?
Wasn't that was Jade was one of the ones that was like NC-17?
Yeah, it was one. It was one of
Was it?
those like Basic Instinct kind
Yeah.
of wannabes that
I
Joe
remember watching
Westerhouse
it
type
like
movies.
95.
Yeah,
Around that time.
and then he did Rules of Engagement with Tommy Lee Jones. So
Good but forgettable.
why am I watching a
Guardian,
military
which is
legal
kind of like-
drama with him?
Oh wait,
Which
the Guardian was that was the Killer Tree movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Druid thing.
Yeah.
I forget everything about that movie.
Yeah, I don't remember at all.
The Killer Tree. There
And
was like
Deal the
babysitter
Century, a
and
Chevy
Tree.
Chase movie that I never seen because it looks awful with Richard Pryor.
So bad. Speaking of Richard Pryor, come on, the Exorcist skit from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a classic.
That's how you knew they made it, when they're spoofing it on
well, they did the whole spoof movie, didn't they, with Linda Blair, Repossessed,
Repossessed.
which was
Which I wanted to see so bad in theaters in 1990, and it didn't play anywhere. I don't know if it played in any theaters, but it didn't play anywhere around me. And then when I saw it, I realized when I rented the VHS, I realized why it didn't play in any theater near me, because it's no airplane, that's for sure.
Not every movie can be an airplane, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So there you have it, everybody. A little look back at The Exorcist as we wait for the new film and the 4K version of the original classic. So let us know what this movie means to you down in the comments below as we pay a little tribute to the late William Friedkin, who passed away a little over a month ago. So thanks, everybody, for watching. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together, all the time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alerted of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks for the Monsters Den. It's our Q&A episode 2 weeks from today. You'll have a separate video where you can add in all your comments, so stay tuned for that. And we'll see you real soon. For Dan, Chris, Jamie, and Davey, and Craig, who couldn't make it tonight, we'll see you in 2 weeks here on the Monsters Den. Take care, everybody.